What happens when two of television's most outspoken women collide on live television in a way nobody saw coming? The answer is pure, unfiltered chaos that left audiences speechless and the studio in complete shock. It started as just another typical morning on Today. Kelly Clarkson was scheduled for what seemed like a routine promotional visit, the kind she's done hundreds of times before. But when Joy Behar showed up as a surprise guest co-host for the segment, the energy in that studio shifted immediately. Before we get into what actually went down, make sure you're subscribed to this channel and drop a comment below, because what you're about to hear is absolutely wild. Kelly walked onto the set with her usual bright smile, waving to the audience, completely unaware of what was waiting for her. The main host welcomed her warmly, and they started with the typical pleasantries. Then came the introduction that changed everything. Joy Behar walked out from backstage, and you could actually see Kelly's expression freeze for just a split second before she recovered and put that professional smile back on. The host tried to lighten the mood, joking about how they were bringing in extra firepower for this interview. Kelly laughed, but anyone watching closely could tell something was already off. Joy settled into her chair with that signature confident posture, and the interview continued. They talked about Kelly's latest projects. First, the new season of her show, some music she'd been working on, standard stuff. Kelly was animated and engaging, as always, telling funny stories from behind the scenes. Joy nodded along, but she had this look in her eyes like she was waiting for something. The host asked Kelly about balancing her career with motherhood, and Kelly gave a thoughtful answer about making time for what matters most and not feeling guilty about setting boundaries. That's when Joy leaned forward. She had this slight smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and said she found it interesting how Kelly talked about boundaries. Considering some of the public comments she'd made recently about work-life balance in the entertainment industry, Kelly's smile tightened. She said she wasn't sure what Joy was referring to. Joy pressed on, bringing up an interview Kelly had done a few weeks prior where she'd discussed how some people in Hollywood seemed to wear their exhaustion like a badge of honor. And maybe that wasn't healthy. The temperature in the room dropped. Kelly shifted in her seat and said she stood by those comments, that she thought it was important to talk about sustainable careers instead of burning out. Joy nodded slowly and then said, "Well, that was easy to say when you've had the kind of success Kelly's had, when you could afford to be selective, when you weren't still fighting for every opportunity." You could see the other host trying to jump in with a different question, but Kelly held up her hand. She looked directly at Joy and said she understood Joy had been in the business a long time, but that didn't mean everyone else had to suffer the way previous generations did. Joy's eyebrows shot up. She said suffer was an interesting word choice, and maybe Kelly didn't understand what real struggle looked like, what it took for women, especially women of a certain generation, to even get seats at these tables. Kelly's voice was still controlled, but you could hear the edge creeping in. She said she had nothing but respect for the women who came before her. But respect didn't mean accepting toxic work environments or pretending that working yourself into the ground was noble. Joy laughed, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. She said toxic was another interesting word, and maybe what Kelly called toxic was just called having a strong work ethic when she was coming up. The audience was dead silent. The host tried again to redirect, asking about Kelly's upcoming holiday special. Kelly ignored the question. She said she thought they were past the point of judging each other's work ethics, that women had fought too hard to still be tearing each other down over these kinds of things. Joy leaned back in her chair and said nobody was tearing anyone down. She was just pointing out that Kelly's perspective came from a very privileged position. That word, privileged, hung in the air. Kelly's jaw tightened. She said she'd worked for everything she had since she was 16 years old. That winning a talent competition didn't erase the years of struggling to make rent or fighting to be taken seriously. Joy said of course Kelly had worked hard. Everyone in this business worked hard. But winning American Idol was hardly the same as spending decades doing stand-up in clubs where the audience threw things at you, or fighting for scraps on television panels, where men talked over you constantly. Kelly said she'd never claimed her experience was the same as Joy's, but that didn't make it invalid. Joy said she never said it was invalid, just that maybe Kelly should think before making sweeping statements about how people should approach their careers when she'd had a pretty smooth path comparatively. Kelly's voice rose slightly. She said, "A smooth path? Really? Should they talk about the label battles? The custody situation that played out in public, the constant scrutiny of every single thing she did." Joy waved her hand dismissively and said, "Everyone in the public eye dealt with scrutiny. That was part of the job, and if Kelly couldn't handle that, maybe she should have stayed in Texas." The audience gasped. The host's mouth literally fell open. Kelly stood up. She didn't yell, but her voice was shaking with anger. She said she had handled it. She was still here, still working, still succeeding. And she didn't need to justify her choices or her career to someone who clearly had already made up her mind. Joy stood up too. She said she hadn't made up her mind about anything. She was just trying to have an honest conversation. But apparently Kelly wasn't mature enough for that. Kelly laughed, a sharp sound. She said maturity, that was rich coming from someone who'd just spent the last 10 minutes taking passive-aggressive shots at her. Joy said if Kelly thought that was passive-aggressive, she clearly had never experienced actual aggression. Maybe that privilege was showing again. Joy said the only point she needed to prove was already made, that Kelly couldn't handle real discourse without crumbling. Kelly shook her head slowly and said real discourse required to people actually trying to communicate, not one person trying to dominate and diminish the other. Joy said maybe that was how Kelly saw it, because she was used to softball interviews where everyone kissed her feet. But out here in the real world, conversations got heated and people disagreed. Kelly said disagreement was fine. She disagreed with people all the time. But there was a way to do it that didn't involve questioning someone's entire worth, or suggesting they didn't deserve their success. Joy threw her hands up and said she never questioned Kelly's worth. She questioned her perspective, her privilege, her unwillingness to acknowledge that maybe her experience wasn't universal. Kelly said she'd acknowledged that multiple times. What she wouldn't acknowledge was that her experience didn't matter just because it was different from Joy's. Joy said that wasn't what she was saying, and Kelly knew it. Kelly said then, what was Joy saying? Because from where she was standing, it seemed like Joy had decided before. Kelly even sat down that she was going to make her look naive or spoiled or ungrateful. Joy said if that was how Kelly interpreted basic questions, then maybe she needed to examine why she was so defensive. Kelly laughed without humor and said defensive. She'd stayed calm and tried to engage respectfully until it became crystal clear this wasn't a conversation, it was a setup. The host had given up trying to control the situation and was just standing there looking horrified. Joy said a setup. Kelly's paranoia was showing. Maybe that came from surrounding herself with yes people who never challenged her. Kelly said her team challenged her all the time. The difference was they did it respectfully and with the goal of actually helping rather than just scoring points. Joy said scoring points. This wasn't a game to her. These were real issues about how women in this industry treated each other and the standards they set. Kelly said if Joy really cared about how women treated each other, she might start by examining her own behavior, by asking herself if what she'd done here today was helping or hurting. Joy said she didn't need a lecture from Kelly about helping women. She'd been fighting those fights when Kelly was still in high school. Kelly said fighting for women and fighting with women were two different things, and lately it seemed like Joy spent more time on the latter. Joy's face was flushed now. She said Kelly had a lot of nerve judging her career, her choices, her impact. When Kelly had barely scratched the surface of what it meant to be a woman with a real voice in this business, Kelly said a real voice didn't require volume or cruelty. It required authenticity and courage, and she was pretty sure she had both. Joy said courage. Kelly didn't know what courage was. Courage was standing up when everyone told you to sit down and shut up, not playing it safe and then claiming you were being brave. Kelly said she'd stood up plenty of times. She'd fought battles Joy knew nothing about, but she didn't need to broadcast every struggle to prove she'd had them. Joy said maybe she should have broadcast them. Maybe then she'd understand why some of us can't afford to be gentle about these things, why some of us have to fight hard because nobody ever gave us anything. Kelly's voice softened slightly, and she said she understood that. She really did. But that didn't mean the next generation had to fight the same way. That didn't mean they couldn't try to build something better. Joy said better. Kelly kept using that word like what came before was somehow less than. Kelly said that wasn't what she meant, and Joy knew it. She meant different, evolved. Learning from what worked and what didn't. Joy said maybe what didn't work was Kelly's approach. This idea that everyone could just be nice and everything would work out. That you didn't have to get your hands dirty or make enemies or sacrifice anything real. Kelly said she'd sacrificed plenty and she had made enemies. Clearly, she was making one right now. Joy said they weren't enemies, they were colleagues having a disagreement. And if Kelly couldn't separate professional criticism from personal attacks, that was her problem. Kelly said this stopped being professional the moment Joy made it personal. The moment she brought up Kelly's path, her privilege, her supposed smooth ride as if she had any idea what Kelly's life had actually been like. Joy said she knew enough. Everyone knew enough. Kelly's story was public, winning a competition, getting a record deal, getting a show. It wasn't exactly a mystery. Kelly said the public story and the real story were two different things, and the fact that Joy assumed she knew everything based on headlines in Wikipedia was exactly the problem. Joy said, "Fine, enlighten her then. Tell her what she was missing. What was so hard about Kelly's journey that made her the expert on how everyone else should conduct themselves?" Kelly paused, and you could see her deciding whether to engage or walk away. She said she wasn't claiming to be an expert on anyone else. That was Joy's thing, not hers. She was claiming the right to her own experience and her own conclusions about what kind of career she wanted to build, and what kind of example she wanted to set. Joy said examples were great until they became judgments on everyone who did things differently. Everyone who couldn't afford Kelly's version of balance and boundaries. Kelly said she'd never judged anyone for their choices. She'd simply shared her own, and if Joy felt judged by that, maybe she should examine why. Joy said she didn't feel judged. She felt annoyed by the implication that her generation's way of doing things was wrong or outdated or something to move beyond. Kelly said it wasn't about right or wrong, it was about options, about giving people permission to choose differently without being made to feel guilty or weak. Joy said nobody was making anyone feel guilty, but actions had consequences and choices had implications. And pretending everyone could just opt out of the hard parts was naive at best and damaging at worst. Kelly said nobody was pretending anything. She was just suggesting that maybe burning out and breaking down shouldn't be prerequisites for success. That maybe caring about mental health and sustainability wasn't weakness, but wisdom. Joy said mental health. Now Kelly was going to lecture her about mental health like that generation invented self-care. Kelly said she wasn't lecturing anyone about anything. She was trying to have the conversation Joy claimed to want. But every time Kelly opened her mouth, Joy twisted her words into something they weren't. Joy said, maybe Kelly's words didn't need twisting. Maybe they were exactly as problematic as they sounded. Maybe Kelly just didn't like hearing herself reflected back. Kelly said what she didn't like was being deliberately misunderstood by someone who should know better, who should understand how hard it was to speak honestly about these things without being attacked. Joy said attacked. There was that word again. Kelly really needed to recalibrate what attack meant if this qualified. Kelly said when someone spent an entire interview undermining her credibility, questioning her experience, and dismissing her perspective, yes, that felt like an attack. Joy said, maybe it felt that way because Kelly wasn't used to people disagreeing with her, wasn't used to having her ideas challenged, wasn't used to being treated like an adult who could handle pushback. Kelly said she could handle pushback just fine. When it came from a place of genuine curiosity or disagreement rather than obvious hostility, Joy said there was no hostility, there was honesty. And if Kelly couldn't tell the difference, that explained everything about this conversation. Kelly looked directly into the camera and said she thought the viewers could tell the difference just fine. They'd watched the whole thing unfold, and they could make their own judgments about what this was and who was responsible. Joy said, oh, perfect. Now Kelly was playing to the audience, trying to win sympathy points instead of actually engaging. Kelly turned back to Joy and said she'd been engaging this entire time. She'd answered every question, responded to every accusation, defended herself at every turn. What more did Joy want? Joy said she wanted Kelly to admit that maybe her perspective wasn't the only valid one, that maybe the way things used to be done had value, that maybe experience and longevity meant something. Kelly said she'd never claimed otherwise, but apparently that wasn't enough. Apparently Joy needed Kelly to completely invalidate her own experience to validate Joy's, and that wasn't going to happen. The host finally managed to speak, her voice shaky, saying they were completely out of time and needed to end the segment. Joy said fine. They were done here anyway. Kelly said they'd been done 10 minutes ago, but Joy couldn't help herself. Joy turned to walk off the set and said, At least she cared enough to engage, instead of just smiling and nodding like a puppet. Kelly called after her, saying, "Engagement required listening, not just waiting for your turn to talk. Maybe Joy should try it sometime." Joy stopped and turned back around, opening her mouth to respond. But the host stepped physically between them, thanking them both in the most strained voice imaginable and throwing to commercial. The cameras cut away, but everyone in that studio knew exactly what had just happened, and within minutes, the clips were everywhere. So make sure you're subscribed to this channel because we'll be covering all the fallout as it happens, and drop a comment below. Kelly took a step closer to Joy's chair. Her voice was low, but crystal clear when she said privilege had nothing to do with recognizing disrespect. And right now, she was being disrespected on live television by someone who should know better. Joy crossed her arms and said, maybe Kelly was too sensitive, too used to everyone treating her like America's sweetheart, to handle a real conversation with someone who didn't worship the ground. She walked on. The host finally managed to speak, stammering something about taking a commercial break, but neither woman was paying attention anymore. Kelly said she'd never asked anyone to worship anything. She just expected basic professional courtesy, the same courtesy she'd shown Joy by even sitting here. Joy scoffed and said, "Oh, please," like Kelly was doing them such a favor by gracing them with her presence, like she wasn't here promoting her own projects. Kelly's hands were shaking now. She said of course she was promoting her projects. That was literally what she was booked for. But that didn't give Joy the right to ambush her with some kind of generational warfare nonsense. Joy said it wasn't an ambush. It was called having a spine, having opinions, not just sitting around agreeing with everything like some puppet. Kelly's voice went very quiet, and she said she'd rather be accused of being agreeable than be known as someone who built a career on tearing other women down to make herself feel relevant. The studio went completely silent. Even the crew members had stopped moving. Joy's face went red. She said, "Excuse me," and Kelly said, "You heard me. You've made a whole brand out of controversial takes and picking fights. And maybe that worked for you, but don't come at me like I'm the problem for wanting something different for myself and the people coming up after me." Joy stepped around her chair. She said Kelly had no idea what she was talking about, that speaking truth and holding people accountable wasn't tearing anyone down. And if Kelly couldn't tell the difference, that explained a lot about her perspective. Kelly said accountability, is that what this was? Because it felt a lot more like jealousy from someone who couldn't stand that other women had found success without following her. Exact blueprint. Joy's voice rose for the first time. She said jealous of what exactly? Of Kelly's talk show that copied every other talk show format. Of her music career that peaked 20 years ago. Of what? Kelly smiled, but there was no warmth in it. She said maybe jealous of the fact that people actually liked her. That she'd managed to build a brand based on positivity and authenticity instead of controversy and bitterness. The host was frantically making cutting motions to someone off camera. Joy said authentic. There was nothing authentic about Kelly's carefully managed image, her safe opinions, her desperate need to be liked by everyone. Kelly said she'd rather be liked than feared, and she'd rather people respected her work than felt obligated to listen to her just because she'd been around forever and yelled the loudest. Joy pointed her finger at Kelly. She said at least when she spoke, people knew it was real, not some focus-grouped, market-tested version of what she thought people wanted to hear. Kelly said the only thing focus-grouped here was Joy's entire persona as the controversial voice, the rebel, when really she was just mean and hiding behind the excuse of being honest. Joy's mouth dropped open. She started to say something, but Kelly kept going. She said everyone was so afraid to say it because Joy had this reputation, this legend status. But the truth was, half the time, she wasn't being brave or groundbreaking. She was just being cruel, and there was a difference. Joy found her voice and said Kelly had some nerve. Coming on this show, into this industry that women like her built, and lecturing her about cruelty, Kelly said she wasn't lecturing anyone. She was defending herself against an attack she didn't provoke and didn't deserve. Joy said if Kelly felt attacked by a few simple questions, then maybe she needed thicker skin. Kelly said there was nothing simple about what Joy had been doing. Every question had been loaded, every comment designed to undercut her, and she was done pretending otherwise. The host tried one more time to intervene, saying they really needed to wrap up, but Joy talked right over her. She said maybe Kelly was done, maybe she should leave then, since clearly she couldn't handle a real conversation without falling apart. Kelly grabbed her microphone pack and started unhooking it. She said she could handle plenty. What she couldn't handle was wasting any more time with someone who thought bullying was the same thing as strength. Now she was being a bully. Kelly really was sensitive, wasn't she? Kelly pulled the mic pack free and set it on her chair. She said no. She was setting a boundary. Something she'd tried to explain earlier before Joy decided to turn this into whatever this was. Joy said whatever this was Kelly showing her true colors, showing that underneath all that sweetness was someone who couldn't take criticism. Kelly turned to face Joy fully. She said criticism would imply Joy had made actual points instead of just personal attacks, and the fact that Joy couldn't see the difference was genuinely sad. Joy said the only sad thing here was watching Kelly throw a tantrum on live television because someone dared to challenge her. Kelly said challenge her on what exactly? Her right to have an opinion. Her right to want better for herself and others. What was the challenge besides Joy's apparent need to prove she was still relevant by going after someone who'd never done anything to her? Joy's voice was ice cold when she said, Kelly wanted to talk about relevance. Fine. Let them talk about how Kelly's ratings had been slipping, how her show was constantly on the bubble, how maybe all that positivity wasn't connecting anymore. Kelly didn't flinch. She said her ratings were fine, and even if they weren't, at least she'd built something based on lifting people up instead of tearing them down. At least when her career eventually ended, people would remember her fondly. Instead of being relieved she was finally gone. Joy took a step toward Kelly, she said. Kelly had no idea what people would remember. And the fact that she was so concerned about being remembered fondly just proved how shallow her whole approach was. Kelly said there was nothing shallow about caring what kind of impact you left, about wanting to make people's lives a little better instead of worse. Joy said impact. Kelly wanted to talk about impact when her entire career had been singing other people's songs and hosting a show where she played games with celebrities. Kelly's composure finally cracked. She said at least she was doing something, creating jobs, giving people a platform, trying to make meaningful content. Instead of just sitting on panels criticizing everyone else's work while contributing nothing new, Joy said, contributing nothing, she'd been a voice for women, for progressive causes, for speaking truth to power for decades while Kelly was still learning her scales. Kelly said speaking truth to power would mean going after people who actually had power, not attacking other women who were trying to do their jobs. Joy said she went after everyone equally. She didn't play favorites. And if Kelly couldn't handle being treated like everyone else, maybe she should go back to her safe little bubble. Kelly said this wasn't about handling anything. This was about Joy proving whatever point she thought she needed to prove.